Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my Hinsub channel. My real name is Aaron Kamenson, and today I've got kind of an experimental one because there's a lot of sort of questions baked into the content I want to talk about. But my sort of goal here is to demystify conversations about personality disorders, and most specifically, schizotypal. By the way, it's supposed to be pronounced schizotypal, some say, but there's a bunch of YouTube psychologists that say schizotypal, and that feels better to me. So, and I'm schizotypal, and there's this attitude out there I'm going to kind of chase after that says that you shouldn't mess too much with personality disorders because they're serious. They're too serious, and if you decide to identify with one, it could be like the negative part of personality typing, where maybe you're making an excuse for behaviors, and maybe how valuable is it to identify with things that sometimes are attached to trauma and maladaptive behaviors, we'll say. But I disagree, because I've been exposed to a lot of people discussing personality disorders online, and it's the most amazing, constructive, beautiful thing. It's this population of people who are like objectifying issues with themselves, kind of keep track of all the troublemakers in their own world. And it's like some of them are almost like sound like trained psychologists at this point on these forums talking about personality disorders. And it's just shout out to the Schizotypal subreddit, r/Schizotypal, greatest place on the planet. I can't believe how amazing Schizotypal people are. Not just the ones who are like, getting older and they're maturing and they're like got like advanced cognitive behavioral therapy where they're like keeping their symptoms down and they sound just like super rational and smart. But like even the ones that are like struggling and they're confused and scared, like they're amazing. Like every single one of them's amazing. But it makes sense I think it makes sense to decide that the existence of personality disorders isn't inherently bad, or at least even though the symptoms are like problem areas. I'd say that there's the meritorious side of this is kind of the definition of personality disorders. It's like you're dancing to the beat of your own drummer. It's like society has this kind of normative things that are normative coded into them. What's normal? What's normative? What's pro-social? What isn't? And it's like society has this drummer that most people are walking to, get everybody on the same page, get everybody to be excited in the same stadium. But there's just a lot of us that, whether they choose to or they don't choose to, are on the kind of the periphery, outside looking in, being critical of the kind of normative code in the culture. And they want to make it better, or look at the parts that are hurting people. Because let's say you're a neurotypical average person and you have this perfect life strategy of being positive all the time and being as optimistic as possible and being pro-social and just having a list of things that you adhere to that keep you psychologically healthy, and you'll have a full, happy life and a family and all this stuff. Well, it's just a matter of fact that even healthy people are going to spend some percentage of their life passing through tough times, or walking through darkness or pain. And during those times, not everybody copes well with passing through darkness. It helps that there's a certain segment of the population that's in love with the darkness, and that you can go to, that want to talk about that stuff haunting them or hurting them, or even traumatizing them or whatever. Like, I feel like personality disorders on the healthy end are like the foot soldiers of staring into the darkness and helping people helping people through it, or just spending time in it. Like, what's wrong with being in love with the darkness, right? Which kind of has like an Enneagram type 5 flavor to it, if you're into that sort of thing. But let's be in love with the darkness. Join us on the Schizotypal forum. Spend time in the Borderline forum and the Avoidant Personality Disorder forum, or YouTube video blogs of avoidant personality disorder people unloading. It's all amazing. It's all valuable, and it's part of demystifying it. First, I should say that personality disorders are common, even the ones that people think are too serious to be worth identifying with, like schizotypal. Schizotypal is between 1 and 3.9% of the general population. That's up to 3.9%, even if it's like, let's say 2%. That means schizotypals are everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And I think if you had a job where you work with like a wide range of like segments of the population, and you have like a lot of coworkers from the various segments of the population, you have and do and will interact with schizotypals. They're not I'm not this rare, beautiful butterfly of schizotypal. They're everywhere. And so let's dig into what you might be identifying in me already. One of the symptoms is magical thinking. Maybe somebody's already watching me and like, what the heck is going on? That's magical thinking. Oh my goodness gracious. My way to demystify that, and I want that, maybe I'll make that the theme throughout. To demystify magical thinking is to say it isn't magical, and it never, ever is. I feel like it's better to think of it as almost like poetry. If you think of a person for a second as this vat of experiences and feelings and identities and history, and just to try to be expressive about any of it, to like really articulate all that just ocean of stuff, to really articulate it well, feels like you almost have to be poetic from the beginning. Naturally, if you're into personality typing, a lot of people just speak in just strictly pragmatic, concrete terms, and that's not true as schizotypals. I had a schizotypal friend in my youth. He moved away. I'm sure we'd still be close if he didn't move away. I think he's kind of a hippie character who I think even lives in basically a hippie commune in some other state now. Probably doesn't even have might not even have access to electricity, so you probably won't even see this. But this friend, he would speak in these like spiritual terms, and one of my favorites was he would describe people close to him as beings of light. Now, depending on the person might hear being of light, and they might think, "What? Are you on drugs? What the heck does that even mean?" Be real. What are you saying? Well, if you spend time with somebody like that, thoughtful and poetic, and you kind of get into the intuitive vibe and you work with them a little bit, it becomes obvious right away. It's not magic. If you're a being of light, my best way to articulate what he meant by being of light is just somebody who's warm and open-minded enough for him to communicate with and to be himself. Like some people, if you find somebody you can be yourself with, it's the most exciting thing ever. And if that person seems warm and open-minded, and they'll just like spend time with all that difficult, magical thinking content, let's say, that person's obviously an amazing, beautiful creature and a good person. And what better way to say that than poetically? Wow, you're a being of light, And even that symptom, that's like, that symptom criteria is specific to schizotypal, but it's all over the personality disorder spectrum. Like, if you go on the Borderline forums and find a borderline who's just like really unloading, and maybe they're pretty symptomatic and they're not happy and they're just really getting into it. Like sometimes there's like a certain space where it's like they've lifted off the planet, right? Like and depending on who you are, it's like, what is going on there? That's magical thinking. I'd argue that maybe schizotypal is pretty comorbid with borderline. Maybe not, but I will say schizotypals are comorbid with borderline strongly, and which is a great way to kind of include more personality disorders in this greater discussion, because there's like a linking up between them. There's comorbidities, right? They co-occur. It's become clear that I'm comorbid with at least two of them. Like one of them's almost kind of hard to admit, but I'm definitely also avoidant personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. That's the one that hurts a little bit, because borderline's really just attachment trauma in the end, right? The person has attachment trauma, and relationships are pretty often fraught in some way because they're not so sure that the other party's gonna just up and abandon them or betray them or hurt them or abuse them. And so here's this relationship between schizotypal and borderline, and I'd say go on the schizotypal form and you find out it's like the schizotypal traits subsume the borderline ones, because almost every schizotypal is going to have at least a few relationships in their life that they can recall where it's clear that they have attachment trauma. And I feel like the best way to kind of whittle that down is to realize, one of the kind of core psychology concepts you encounter is secure attachments and insecure attachments, which are formed in childhood, right? A child and a parent, if they have a secure attachment, the parent can leave and the child can have full confidence that parent will come back and that is a relationship they can depend on, that's secure. And when the parent's gone, the child can independently explore the world with a sense of confidence because they're teamed up with a secure attachment. And if that's broken in some way, and there's something anxious about the attachment, that's the best way to put it, insecure attachment. If they have an insecure attachment, that kind of echoes in some ways through their life, and it becomes more complicated to fully trust, let's say. And you can kind of see that in borderlines. It almost feels like there's like this competition between love and, let's say, the abuse. It's like even like a lot of average relationships, they're not harmonious. Some relationships in my life, it's like the couple, it's like the point is for them to be at each other's throats nonstop. And it's so funny to realize that a lot of those couples they're going to make it to the end. They're going to stick it out. And of course with borderline, that's a tough one, because I feel like borderlines, they have this most romantic vision of love and how to fill it and to go through all this stuff to feel lovable and put all this energy into it. But then there's this like negative part of their perspective they're hiding from that can kind of come rushing in when they get little hints of negativity, and it spoils the whole picture, and they go from just like this idealized version of love, and it's just all sours at once, and so there's this basic schism between the idealized and the cynical, and that's the word I want to use. I feel like a lot of personality disorders, there's this core schism somewhere. Maybe it's in their attachment style in relationships or some part of their perception. So like a lot of personality disorders, especially borderline and schizotypal, are ones that have a super, super high likelihood that those people have some substance use disorder. They alcoholics or addicts, and there's. So how to describe the schism? I like to think of it as like there's states I can be in where it almost kind of feels like my brain hemispheres are competing with one another. And I think when, especially with alcoholics, they have those moments where the negative section of the brain just takes over, and maybe it's almost like a version of psychosis, and they have to, I had to give up alcohol, but to live down those experiences where you just completely impulsively act out that kind of hyper negative part of your brain, and it really is kind of like that. Like, it's like, if you go on the schizotypal forum and you hear people talking about multiple personalities, well, you can kind of imagine it like there's a section of your brain that you want to hide from that's the most cynical part of your brain. And I feel like the trick, that you hear from psychologists, sometimes like Jordan Peterson, for example, is you want to integrate that monster with you. Like, I hate wording it this way, but it's like at some point you realize, especially if you've been an addict and you've had these horrific, impulsive evenings that you're not proud of. It's like, even after you've given about alcohol, I feel like part of the healing process is realizing that there's a monster inside of you, and eventually I feel like the trick is just to have your monster present at all times. Like if you're basically a negative person and there is maybe multiple parts of you, to just kind of keep them together. And even like when I'm sober and healthy, I'll even kind of manifest, like I spend a lot of time alone, and it's kind of like I have characters I spend time with when I'm in solitude, and I'm happily on my, like I'll have one character who I emote with that's like chirpy and innocent and enthusiastic and gets shocked by things easily. And I like raise the pitch of my voice. And there's like another negative character who's I like to maybe think is my Hinsu character, where I'm even like contort my face a little bit, and it's like stark, serious, dire perspective. Like I'll give you a sample of Hinsu. He's like, everybody's life is really just a freight train on a collision course, and they keep piling stuff onto this train that they know is going to crash and light on fire. And so it's like they don't realize that building a full life and having a lot of participants, you're really just escalating your pain. You're really just adding more things that are going to be part of the eventual inevitable fireball. It has this menacing spirit, and not to freak anybody out, but that's kind of like depression, right? Like there's this idea kind of floating around that people like to say that depressed people are delusional. And actually it's the opposite. People who are depressed generally have the most realistic view of the world. It's like I had a professor who even thought that he liked to think of it as people who are smart, who are realistic, are more likely. It's like if you have a high IQ, maybe you're more likely to get plagued by these realistic sections of your brain. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's just that depression lets all the negative stuff in, and a lot of it's true, because if you think about all the worst possibilities and evaluations, like pretty often they are true. And so it's like you don't want to hide from the truth, but you kind of have to cut yourself off at some point. Like there does have to be a schism from that. You can't just spend all your time in in the hyper realistic darkness section of your brain, right? You gotta come up and breathe. And sometimes I feel like there's a version of that you can be enthusiastic with. Like pretty often when I'm at my healthiest, the stuff I'm considering are not like the most fluffy, positive topics, but like I'll learn something that's negative, and just the process of learning it and then having that aha moment is like the richness in life for me, even if it's negative. All right. Get it together. I always build these little lists and then I'm all over the place, but this is good. I like that this is a little rough because you see me, right? And this schizotypal. But let's bring this home a little bit. So we got the loner stuff. People are social creatures. The other thing. A lot of neurotypical. So if you think of most of society as this, of the culture's building norms, right? And I think as part of that, most average people are high in a trait called agreeableness, where it's like they expect the world to be harmonious, and I kind of touched on that. But I think that the trap here that I want to touch on is if you're low on agreeableness and you're like competitive and you know that you don't owe people their comfort, especially if they say something ridiculous. I feel like low agreeableness can still be pro-social, but it's complicated for some people because, for example, I've talked about autism spectrum disorder in the past, and there's kind of an autistic element to a lot of the personality disorders because it's like, for some reason they don't know, a lot of us don't know how to be perfectly sensitive to people that just demand constant harmony with societal norms. It's like if you're dead set on not doing that, it's like you confuse them and they can't get over it. I think it's why autistic spectrum disorder folks have so much trouble. They'll hear somebody say something ridiculous that's not perfectly rational, possibly stupid, whatever, and they're not just going to let it sit. They're going to correct them. They're gonna try to update that person, right? And that person isn't used to being face to face with somebody that's so uncompromisingly rational, and so that the conflict comes out. And it sounds like a personality typing talk, right? Feeling types and thinking types, cats and dogs, dealing with that. And I like to have us looking at autism spectrum disorder, which I've talked about in the past. Autism spectrum disorder overlaps almost completely with schizoid personality disorder, because schizoids are like that too, like super, like hyper rational and not part of the societal norms, and they're so indifferent. They don't, their affect is even kind of drained out. Like, they don't even really smile very often. And schizotypals are kind of like related to that, but they're not. Schizotypals aren't indifferent, right? I'm not indifferent. I'm definitely deeply affected by other people, and even though I'm a loner, I still aspire to, a love relationship that's long term, So, and another one, just to keep demystifying other disorders, even narcissism, that's like the big scary one, right? But if you think about narcissists, they're really just people protecting their self-image, at all and it's just like, where are you on the scale of protecting your self-image? Is it like do or die? Like, an attack on your self-image is directly an attack and you have to defend yourself, you know. And the issue I have with, like, I understand why narcissistic personality disorder is a big challenge, but like, in some way, you know, like, if narcissists think they're special, like, I feel like the solution to that is just be actually special, you know, like, it's possible to be special. You can be a superhero in your life. You can be somebody's superhero. You can be that person people put on that plateau, on that, and just be. If you're gonna, if your whole scheme is to feel special, be special. And if you're kind of fumbling the ball and something, there's a lot of holes in that, and even like abuse starts happening, obviously you shouldn't be allowed to claim that special title anymore. And it sucks that you have to kind of adjust your behavior. It sucks that you can't just believe all the time that you're special, that you have to earn it. But I don't know, maybe that's the solution to that one. Earn your specialness, right? And it's one I think about a lot, because schizotypal feels like a more forceful way to say that you're special, because, you know, the weirdness and the eccentricity. But I think if you're schizotypal and I always like to worry about narcissism, but I think if you're schizotypal, you can kind of cross that one off a list, because, God, every schizotypal person I've heard from is deeply self-critical. So even if they have that moment where, you know, it's kind of like in your face magical thinking, and maybe they even kind of seem accidentally menacing when they're not being sensitive to norms, you know. Which I've got funny stories. Schizotypals are so funny sometimes, right? Like, they're like just automatic awkwardness, and awkwardness, it's worth celebrating awkwardness sometimes. Like, it gets you in trouble, but it's also hilarious. But anyway, it always comes back. Like, if you know you're a weirdo, like, schizotypals know they're weird, is the point. They're self-critical. You know, one of the definitions of schizotypals is if they're delusional, you can show them they can say, oh yeah, well this isn't completely accurate, but we're using this idea for something else. I'm doing it right now. Some of this, I might have even exposed a delusion I have in here, but, you know, I'm super receptive to ideas and feedback naturally. Like, I guess my point is, if you're schizotypal, you don't have to torture yourself. And just kind of in general, like, when you spend time on these forums, and there's so many people with all this negative stuff in their past, I feel like one of the big challenges is just to forgive yourself. See that here's these things that have caused these issues. It sucks that the issues happened, but you can't just suffer for it forever. You know, like, even if you kind of trip over and you're not sensitive to somebody who's kind of traditionally minded or whatever, and you make mistakes, but you can be a good person with a personality disorder. You can be a super good person with a personality disorder. It's actually, so I remember my picture over here, my point to have, there's Les Claypool of Primus fame, and there's Buckethead, another popular musician who's brilliant on the guitar. Buckethead is schizotypal. There's I guess a healthy manifestation of schizotypal. A guitarist that's got a whole bunch of fans, and I'm sure, you know, somebody will be like, hey, you can't diagnose somebody. Buckethead, if you're out there, I'm sure he knows he's schizotypal, probably. I saw a forum of people discussing whether or not he's autistic, and somebody spoke with authority and was like, nope, you guys are pretty close, but no cigar. Buckethead's schizotypal. And you can see it plainly. Look, here's a person. He's a public figure always wears a mask. He doesn't want people to know his name, doesn't want people to know what he looks like. He doesn't speak on stage. He just plays guitar. He speaks through characters saying things or handing people presents or whatever. And we have gotten to know Buckethead. His only time where he kind of exposed him is there's a podcast where he's talking to a psychologist, and he's like fully symptomatic, he's just freaking out and showing people what he's going through. And he had one of the things with schizotypals is they have body illusions, and that's actually one of my personal my symptoms are the same as Buckethead. I don't mind exposing my face. I hide my face pretty often with my bangs, right? But I have body illusions probably 70 different times in my life. I was sure I was having a heart attack, which is definitely, that's Buckethead. Buckethead went through a phase when he was certain he was dying. I'm about to lose my life. There's something wrong with my heart. And that was, I don't know how many years ago that was, several years ago. He's still alive, and he's pumping out amazing music and making it through. Buckethead's not a young guy anymore, so there's a successful schizotypal right there. It happens. And he has friends, probably a lot of schizotypals, they have to manage that. Like, they need a lot of solitude, but the solution, I don't know if I said it yet. Friends are medicine. Find introverted, quirky friends that don't mind digging into quirky stuff, and you're pretty much home free. All right, so I gotta tie this up, and I think my way to tie this up is to read you something, some lyrics from They Might Be Giants song called "They'll Need a Crane," and I feel like this kind of sums up the borderline issue, which I think is pretty important to schizotypal. Here we go. Here's part of the beginning of They'll Need a Crane. Love sees love's happiness, but happiness can't see that love is sad. Sadness is hanging there to show love somewhere something needs a change. They need a change. They'll need a crane. Of course, that's like a lot of people get into bad relationships and stay in them. And I feel like, of course, borderlines, they don't need a crane. They need it to be that solid to begin with, that they have to worry about needing a crane. But, you can't be scared of love forever. You can't go 100% on the loner scale. You got to come up for air. You got to let something like love in somewhere, even if like a lot of people on the schizo spectrum just don't. They just do end up alone, and you always wonder, like, do you need love? Like, is it okay to be single for the rest of your life? And that's a tough one, because it's like everybody, like, maybe, who knows? I can't predict whether or not I'm gonna get out of the loner section of things, but I think the answer has to be yes. Of course, you can. Of course, you don't need a romantic relationship. You can be a happy, mostly fulfilled loner. You just find your, get creative outlets. And sorry, we're getting into the. I start worrying about the length of these things, but anyway, this was fun. Hopefully, I accomplished my goal of showing that personality disorders are part of the world, and they're not inherently bad, and especially discussions about them, because we all got stuff, right? And it's good that somebody's whipping on the culture, and not necessarily part of it. And schizotypals are beautiful people, if you ask me. Join us on the Schizotypal forum, r// schizotypal. Let's do it. Anyway, thank you, friends. Oh, only 35 minutes. Not too bad. Oh, see you later.